Good evening. My name is Heather Crossan, and I am the president and one of the co-founders. First Principles Forum. Thank you all for coming here this evening. We so appreciate it. I would like to start first with the invocation from Monsignor Shadle.
Thanks, Heather. I used to think Catholics were the only one that was difficult to get away from the bar and get into the room, but I see it's very interdenominational. So let us pray. God, our Father and Creator of the world, during this holy season of the year, our thoughts turn to you and your care for all people created in your image and likeness. And yet, even in this season of goodwill, in these troubled times for our world, we continue to find division, deceit, pride, and selfish motives. Come quickly to bring peace to nations ravaged by war, especially the people of Sudan, Nigeria, the people of Ukraine, and your own chosen people in the land of Israel. In the wars of division, violence, and senseless words that exist in our own nation. Guided by truth, may we work together to strengthen the values on which our great nation was founded: freedom, the right to happiness, mutual respect, and peace. Allow us to work together to hand on a better world to those who will come after us. Bless our gathering here this evening as we seek to listen and share, that we may know you, serve you, and love you, our God, who lives and reigns forever and ever. Amen.
Thank you, Monsignor Shadle. We appreciate that. I'd like to just make a few brief remarks, and then we'll get straight to our guest of honor. I'd like to thank, first of all, our event committee for this evening, Tylene Eckhart, Dana Moore, Kathleen Smith, Nancy Moore, Julie Drew, and Lillian and Tom Coble, who assisted with tonight's event. We appreciate their help. And we also want to thank all of you who are here this evening. And for those of you who this may be your first event with our organization, we would like you to look at your program. I'd also like to say a special thanks to Molly Evans, who does all of our graphic design and printing for all these wonderful programs. But this is our main mode of marketing. It's all word of mouth. We're a volunteer organization, completely self-funded due to the generosity of all of you here. Through ticket sales and generous donations, we've been able to bring all of these speakers that you can see on the back of the program since the May of 2021. So we're 2.5 years strong, a grassroots, organically founded organization that's really been promoted word of mouth. And we're so grateful that all of you are here. So thank you so much for your support by choosing to come here and spend the evening with us. I'd also like to say that we are unique in the sense that we are so grateful that this is really a multi-generational organization. And we've tried to create events that, incentivize people from 15 all the way to 99. And so we think that's one of the wonderful features of First Principles Forum, our events that we felt that there was a lack of speakers who shared our commitment to the founding principles of our nation and our similar concerns about the future of our republic. And so that's what we've tried to do. And so we hope that you'll take the program home, share it with a friend who may not be familiar with our organization, and let them know that we'd love to have them at any of our future events. The next of which is on the inside of your program. So again, I hope you'll take it home and keep it. And that is a Indiana Republican gubernatorial candidate forum that we are hosting on Thursday, January 25th at the Tarkington Theater in Carmel. We have a panel consisting of the executive editor of The Federalist, Joy Pullman, who's here with us this evening, as well as former Fox 59 host Fanchon Stinger. So we look forward to that event, and we really need your help. There's 500 seats in that auditorium, and so we hope to pack the house, and we have all of our candidates ready to come and answer policy-based, issues-oriented questions so that when you leave there, you'll really maybe have an opportunity to know how they differentiate themselves substantively rather than simply a stump speech that maybe you don't know where they stand on the issues. That's the point of the evening, and we have a research team devising great questions. So we hope you'll put that on your calendar, save the date, and spread the word because, again, all of our marketing has been word of mouth, nothing more than that. And so we're very grateful for your attendance here tonight. And I'd like to also point out we're so glad that there's been such an interest in the younger generation. Oftentimes, 30% of our audience has been under the age of 35. And so within the organization, we've started a YP network, which is Young Professionals Network. And we're so pleased that we have two young ladies here with us this evening, Caroline Smith and Gallagher Foxworthy. If you'd both please stand. They are spearheading the events that we'll be hosting for them. We've had happy hours, we've had watch parties for debates. We have a number of opportunities for young people under the age of 35 to get together and meet one another and share their interests. And so we'd like to, if you know someone that fits that age range, please, by all means, sign up. We have a sign-up sheet. We'd love to know their email, phone number, and name if they'd like to get invited to future events. And if you're here and you're that age, and I know many are coming because they're late from the Colts game, including some of mine, they will be gathering afterwards sort of around the Christmas tree out in the lobby. So with no further ado, I'd like to invite Gallagher Foxworthy, who will be introducing our keynote speaker. And we're so thrilled because Gallagher is a native of Indianapolis. She's lived all over the world. She's married to a wonderful man who served our country, just finished. They just moved back from Fort Bragg. And we're so thrilled to have her here with us this evening. She's very accomplished in her own right. She's a writer and has a lot to share. So we're so pleased. Thank you, Gallagher.
Thank you, Heather. Good evening, everybody. It is so awesome to be up here tonight and introducing such a great speaker. My family and I have been attending First Principle Forum events since the beginning with Candace Owens at the Lucas Estate. And since then, the wonderful people behind this organization have continued to bring in relevant speakers that invite us to think for ourselves and give us opportunities to learn about complex current topics and issues from experts across multiple fields. It's refreshing to have an organization here in Indy like FPF that explores topics that are often overlooked and brings in speakers that we can't really find elsewhere. I know personally, as a millennial, I find myself scrolling on social media and seeing the same repeated jargon over and over, constantly being bombarded with one-sided opinions and beliefs that have been decided to be correct by a majority who disregard and don't even consider that there is more than one perspective to learn from. I find my curiosity is often criticized and silenced. First Principles Forum has encouraged and fed my curiosity and given me the opportunity to not only connect with, but learn from others who are also eager to expand their beliefs and more deeply understand their morals and values. It is important in today's social climate to truly do research and explore within ourselves why we believe what we do, and do so with curiosity and with the intention to further expand our mind. We cannot allow ourselves to just be told what to believe, but to lean into our God-given right and free will to stand firm in what we are and what it is that we choose. On the heels of the impending legal proceedings regarding Hunter Biden, the Biden family, and their dealings with China, First Principles Forum couldn't have brought in a more relevant speaker who has been calling out corruption within our nation and the world for decades. I'm so excited to introduce Peter Schweizer. Peter is a New York Times bestselling author 7 times over, with his most recent #1 New York Times selling books, Red-Handed, American Elites Get Rich Helping China Win, Secret Empires, Profiles in Corruption, and Clinton Cash, just to name a few. Not only is Peter a writer, but he is also the president of the Government Accountability Institute and the host of a weekly podcast called The Drill Down. Previously, Peter was a Hoover Fellow at Stanford University and worked as a speechwriter during George W. Bush's administration. He was a member of the Ultra-Terrorism Study Group at the Sandia National Laboratory and is a formal consultant to NBC News. He is also a senior contributor to Breitbart. Clearly an expert in exposing corruption and sharing truth, Peter's books have been translated into 11 languages, and his investigative journalism has been featured on CBS's 60 Minutes, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, and Fox News, among many other places. His 2014 book, Extortion, exposed insider stock trading by members of Congress and led to passage of a Stock Act outlawing the practice. He has written for Foreign Affairs, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, National Review, and elsewhere, and appears regularly on television, radio, and on many podcasts. Peter received his MPhil from Oxford University and his BA from George Washington University. He's currently living in Florida with his wife, Rhonda. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Mr. Peter Schweizer.
I tell you what, I deal with a lot of muck and dirt in my professional vocation, and I must say, when I come here to Indiana and I see these optimistic, smart, intelligent young people that are fighting for their country, man, that gives me hope. And I got to tell you, really, really impressive. So thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm here to talk to you tonight about what I regard as the most corrupt presidents in American political history. And I don't say that out of joy. I don't say that because I'm excited. I don't say that because I hate Joe Biden. Probably a few years ago, it would have been fun to have a beer with Joe Biden. But I say that because I think it's the truth. And what I want to do tonight is talk to you about the extent to which the Biden family have enriched themselves on government service, and more importantly, how Joe Biden himself has committed felonious crimes against the United States. Now, why would I say that he's the most corrupt American president in the United States, and what do I mean by that expression? Well, I'm really using 2 metrics. One is the scope, the amount of money, the amount of instances, the number of family members that are engaged in corrupt acts is unprecedented. There's actually 5 members of the Biden family that I would regard have engaged in corrupt acts, many of them criminal. So the first part is the sheer amount of money that we're talking about, tens of millions of dollars, if not more. I would say it's probably close to $100 million that the family has pocketed through his public service. But the second metric I would say is who the corruption actually involves. Now, anybody that's spent 5 minutes studying American political history or recent American political activity knows that corruption exists. There's the guy who wants the paving contract from the county council, or there's the guy that goes to Washington, D.C. and wants a carve out in a piece of legislation that's going to help their business because it's written in just the right way. That happens all the time, sadly. What we're talking about with the Bidens is not rank and file corruption. It's corruption involving some of the most troubling and dangerous people in the world. We're not talking about American businessmen who are trying to corruptly advance their commercial interests. We're not just talking about American money being lost because of corruption. We're talking about business deals done by this family with countries and individuals around the world that have an adversarial enemy view of the United States. This is who the Biden family has decided to throw their lot into. Now, let me give you just a little bit of a brief history on Biden family corruption itself. Joe's been in office since 1972, which is amazing when you consider the length of it. And there are lots of instances before he became vice president as to his corrupt behavior. Hunter Biden, for example, the two jobs that he had before his father became vice president. One, he became the vice president of a bank that happened to be in Delaware, and he received that vice presidency after his father supported credit card legislation that bank wanted passed. And it was that simple. Joe passed the bill, Hunter got the job. The second job that Hunter Biden had besides the working for the bank was as a lobbyist. He worked for a lobbying firm, and he specifically worked for entities in Delaware that wanted things from his father. That was the other major job that Hunter Biden had while his father was senator. So this sort of is a practice within the Biden family and has been going on for decades. But it really became turbocharged when Joe Biden became vice president of the United States. Because there are some things you can do as a senator of a small state, as a powerful senator that's been there for a long time. But once you become president of the United States, arguably the second most powerful person in the country, there are lots of people around the world that want to have you in their pocket, that want favors, that want benefits. And if you're willing to play the game, Joe Biden is willing to play the game, and the victims in this scenario is, of course, the United States. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the examples of what the Bidens did. You may have heard of some of these. Some of them you may not have, and I think the level of detail is important to go in here. But a pattern is going to emerge as I go through these examples, and the pattern is this. When Joe Biden became vice president of the United States, Barack Obama put him in charge of a handful of issues. He became the point person on those issues. And what you're going to find is that in every single case that Joe Biden became point person on Obama administration policy on an issue, a family member from the Bidens cashed in handsomely. And oftentimes the beneficiaries were adversaries of the United States. So let's begin with one that I think is particularly galling. Maybe you have or haven't heard of it. But this involves Joe's responsibility, appointed by Barack Obama in 2011. Joe Biden was put in charge of Iraqi reconstruction. We all remember 2003, the United States went into Iraq, a terrible battle, series of battles took place. We had a lot of brave men and women who passed away in that battle. By 2010, 2011, the Obama-Biden administration said, we want to start rebuilding this place. We're going to pump tens of billions of dollars into Iraq to rebuild it. So set aside your views on whether that's a good idea. But look at the series of events that unfolds. And these are things I've written about. I've not faced any challenges of litigation because everything that I report on, there's a paper trail for. So this is all in black and white. I don't use anonymous sources. So in early November of 2011, a guy named Kevin Justice, an old-time Biden family friend from Delaware, goes to the White House to meet with the vice president's chief of staff and other members of his senior staff. He'd just been appointed a couple months ago with responsibility for reconstruction of Iraq. Kevin Justice shows up. Kevin Justice meets with his office. About a week after that, he creates a new company called Hillstone International. It's a construction company. Hillstone then, about 3 weeks after that, appoints Jim Biden, Joe Biden's brother, as the executive vice president of this construction company. Now, you're going to hear this a lot in this speech. Jim Biden actually has no experience in the construction industry, right? And you're going to hear this about Hunter and everybody else. But so here you have a friend of the Biden family who sets up a construction company, a new construction company, and the executive vice president happens to be Joe Biden's brother, Jim Biden, who has no background in construction. 3 months after Jim Biden is appointed to this position, Hillstone announces it's a part of a consortium of 4 other companies that has landed a no-bid contract from our federal government to the tune of $35 billion to build 100,000 homes in Iraq. 100,000 homes in Iraq. Now, again, Jim Biden is the executive vice president of this company. It's one of 4 companies involved in this consortium. They get a $35 billion contract to build 100,000 homes, and he does not have a lick of experience in construction. You see what the pattern that's emerging here, right? Joe Biden is put in charge of something. He has control over money. He has control over policy. He slots a family in, and the family profits handsomely from it. But I would tell you honestly that this one is probably one of the more mild ones involving the Biden family. And I know that seems like a strange thing to say because the amount of money is so big, but it's actually a relatively mild one when we get to the ones that I think are even more troubling. But let's consider another area where Joe Biden, as vice president of the United States, becomes the point person for Barack Obama, and that is U.S. relationships with Latin America, with South America. All right, that sounds good. Joe's got background in diplomacy. He goes to Latin America. He meets with the president of Costa Rica in 2010. Then something strange happens 4 weeks after that. His other brother, Frank, shows up in Costa Rica and announces he's starting a solar company. Now, Frank is a little bit like James. He has no background in solar energy. His brother didn't have it in construction. He doesn't have it in solar energy. But he's decided he's going to have a solar company, and he manages to snag a meeting with the president of Costa Rica. Now, why do we think the president of Costa Rica took that meeting? I think we all know why he took that meeting. Brother Frank meets with the president of Costa Rica and then announces that he gets a federal loan from our federal government for it's called an OPIC loan, OPIC, to build solar farms in Central America, specifically Costa Rica and Jamaica, even though he has no background. By the way, $22 million went into that. No solar facilities were actually ever built. So that's example number 2. But we haven't gotten to what I think is the biggest and most troubling and most angering and infuriating part of the Biden family, corruption family. And that, of course, is Hunter Biden himself. Now, I've been doing work on Hunter Biden since 2016. We were the first ones to expose the deals in China, the deals in Ukraine in 2018. And there's been an amazing evolution of the Biden family's explanation when we started reporting on this. When my first book came out on this in 2018, Wall Street Journal did a news story on it. They went to talk to the Biden family, and the Biden family said, China deals? There's no deals in China. He's lying. This is just a political attack. So their first defense was there were no deals at all. The second defense became, well, there might have been deals, but Joe didn't know about them. That became the second line of defense. When it became clear that Joe actually knew about them, the third line of defense became, well, Hunter didn't really make any money on those deals. Then when it turned out that Hunter actually made tens of millions of dollars on those deals, they moved to the next line of defense, which was Joe never had anything to do with the business. When it was then exposed that, of course, Joe Biden had met with his business partners, talked to his business partners, done favors for his business partners, you have now the latest evolution, Hunter Biden on Capitol Hill just a few days ago, and did you hear the very precise wording that he used? He said, my father is not financially involved in my business, which, as I'm going to show you, is, of course, in itself another Biden family lie. So they have repeatedly, with the help of the media, avoided scrutiny on these issues. But now, as you might say, the chickens are starting to come home to roost, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But let's talk about Hunter's gig. What did Hunter do? If you listen to the media, if you listen to Hunter Biden's lawyer, he's basically a drug addict. He's not capable of doing anything. We should feel sorry for him. And this was really just something that was haphazard. The fact of the matter is this was a very calculated and very organized effort to enrich the Biden family. Joe Biden gets elected vice president of the United States and is sworn in January of 2009. 4 months later, Hunter Biden decides he's going to go into international finance. This is a guy who has no background in finance. has no experience doing business overseas, but he forms a business called Rosemont Seneca Partners. Interestingly, his business partner in this is a guy who happens to be the stepson of John Kerry, who becomes the Secretary of State in the Obama-Biden administration. Now, this is an international finance firm. Where do you think they actually set up their offices? Now, you might think, okay, New York, international finance city, maybe they have a branch in London. No, they actually set up their international finance firm in Washington, D.C., within walking distance of two things: the vice presidential mansion and John Kerry's personal home, because they knew ultimately what the business was about. Now, international finance, what does this actually mean, and what did it actually translate into, and what did this corruption look like? Well, remember again, we talked about what? Joe Biden has been appointed point man on a series of policies for the Obama administration. And you see the enrichment taking place here as well. Let's begin with China. China is the one that I think is most glaring and the most troubling. Some $31 million have flowed from 4 Chinese businessmen to the Biden family through Hunter Biden. And we know that because we have access to the laptop, we have access to the financial records, and we know where the flow of money came. Think about that for a second. $31 million from 4 Chinese businessmen, but the story is even worse than just those numbers reveal. Because you start to look at who were those 4 businessmen, and you come to a shocking conclusion. And that is that those 4 Chinese businessmen who put $31 million in the pocket of the Biden family all have ties to the highest levels of Chinese intelligence. Now, I don't say that loosely. I don't say that in a general way. It's very, very clear, and it's very, very specific. So, for example, there's a businessman named Che Feng. Hunter Biden called him the super chairman. And on his laptop, he wrote to one of his colleagues when the deals were going through, "I don't believe in the lottery anymore, but I believe in the super chairman." Well, who is the super chairman? Who is this Che Feng who decides he's going to give some $20 million to the Bidens? Well, Che Feng at that time was a business partner with the Vice Minister of State Security for China, a guy named Ma Jian. Now, what does this Vice Minister for State Security do in China? He's responsible for recruiting foreign nationals to spy for the Chinese Communist Party. So that's businessman number 1, who gives $20 million for Hunter Biden. And when you look through the business communication, you quickly realize Hunter Biden's doing nothing in return for this $20 million. There's no service, there's no product, there's no advice, there's no capital, there's nothing. It's $20 million given to him by this businessman with these intelligence ties. But there are others. He gets $6 million from a gentleman named Henry Zhao. Henry Zhao is a businessman and an investment advisor in China, but he's not an ordinary investment advisor. You see, Henry Zhao is business partners with the daughter of the Minister of State Security. This is the guy that runs the entire spy apparatus of China. Henry Zhao gives $5 million to Hunter Biden. His business partner is the daughter of the Minister of State Security. And again, the $5 million, there's no service, there's no product, there's nothing that is done in return for that $5 million. And then you look at a third businessman. This would be a gentleman he calls Chairman Yi. You might, if you've heard about the laptop and you've heard the news reporting on the laptop, one of the people that works for a Chairman Yi, a guy named Patrick Ho, is the guy that Hunter Biden describes as the effing spy chief of China. So that's actually a pretty accurate assessment because Chairman Yi, before he went into the energy business, I'll put that in quotation marks, worked for Chinese military intelligence. So think about the magnitude of what we're talking about here, everybody. The first family of the United States has been given $31 million by a group of Chinese businessmen, more than 1 billion people in China. But all of these businessmen just happen to have ties to Chinese intelligence. And they're not asking for anything in return that we know of for this money. That's the sort of magnitude of what we are facing. And there's no evidence, and Hunter Biden's never offered any explanation for why that money has arrived. And so the question is, what did and what does China get in return for that $31 million? And on this area, we're going to have to kind of speculate, but I think you can look at a couple of things. You see, when Hunter got that $20 million, remember the first one I talked about, Che Feng, gave him the $20 million. It was equity in a financial business, just gave it to him. He gave it to him at the exact time that Hunter Biden's father, Joe Biden, happened to be negotiating with Chinese officials the entry of Chinese companies onto the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ Stock Exchange. And the problem was, here was the rub. Our stock exchanges wanted to welcome these companies, said, sure, you can list on our exchange. People can buy your shares. The problem was the Chinese companies didn't want to conform to our accounting standards. They didn't want to abide by Sarbanes-Oxley. They didn't want to abide by the normal regulatory rules that anybody in this room that's involved in the stock market would abide by if you wanted to have a company listed. So what they asked for and what Joe Biden gave them, while his son is bagging $20 million, is a way of avoiding those regulations so that today, still today, the agreement that Joe Biden struck in 2013 means that the Chinese companies on our stock exchanges do not have to conform to the accounting standards that any other company from any other country on the planet has to abide by. That is one hell of a benefit, and I think there is a reason that deal occurred and Hunter Biden got his $20 million ownership stake in the financial firm at the same time, literally within weeks of each other. So let's talk about a couple of other countries, and then I'm going to explain to you where I think things are going in the investigation. Let's talk about Russia. We all remember the days of Russia collusion. The fact that there was secret communication taking on between the Trump administration and the Putin regime in Russia that ended up being a wild hoax. And I'm not suggesting that there was Russia collusion of that grand scale that was alleged against Trump and proven to be wrong, but there is absolutely collusion that has taken place between certain Russian entities and the Biden administration. And so at this point, let me introduce you to another one of the illustrious business partners of the Biden family, and that is a lady named Yelena Baturina. Anybody heard of Yelena Baturina? Yes. So Yelena is the former wife of the mayor of Moscow. The mayor of Moscow, who was highly corrupt, a Putin ally. She ended up divorcing him. She was clearly the brains of the operation because he ended up dying in some mysterious way. And she ended up being this massively successful Russian oligarch. And to be a massively successful Russian oligarch, obviously what? You need to be tied in with Putin, you need to be pro-Putin, and you need to have ties to organized crime. And in fact, the Obama State Department declared that Yelena Baturina was known to be a member of Russian organized crime. So imagine you are Hunter Biden. You need to have a colorful imagination now. But imagine you are Hunter Biden, and in the spring of 2014, Yelena Baturina calls you up and says, I would like to invest in your company. I would like to give you $3.5 million, and I would like to have you manage potentially $200 million worth of my investments. Now, I'm thinking if you're not Hunter Biden, most people in this room would say, this sounds really sketchy. Of course, Hunter Biden jumped in with both feet. Now, here's the interesting question of timing. This happened in the spring of 2014, literally 10 days before the Russians invaded Ukraine the first time. Remember the first time they invaded in 2014 in the spring? Yelena Baturina shows up. Hunter Biden had flown to Moscow to meet with her before. She now shows up, says, I'm going to give you $3.5 million. She's pro-Putin. She's pro-war. She's tied with Russian organized crime. The Russians storm into Ukraine, and the Obama administration says, we need to resist this. We're going to put sanctions on all the Russian oligarchs that are tied to Vladimir Putin. And there's a list of about 350 of them. And some of them are quite prominent. Well, it's a pretty smart crowd. Guess who was not on the list of the 350 for sanctions? Yelena Baturina. Who was the point person on U.S. policy towards Ukraine at this time? Joe Biden. Now, it's interesting because that $3.5 million apparently went quite far because, of course, remember, Russia invades Ukraine again. Now it's not the Obama-Biden administration, it's the Biden administration. Joe Biden is president. They invade again. And Joe Biden's response this time is to provide military aid, but it's to also broaden those sanctions to even more entities. He now adds more than 400 more. So you've got 780 Russian oligarchs and companies that are sanctioned. They cannot do business in the West. Guess who still is not on that list? That would be Yelena Baturina. And by the way, she's pro-war, she's pro-Putin. So it is a remarkable example, I think a small one, but a significant one, on what we are actually dealing with here when it comes to the Biden family. And then let me turn finally, in terms of our jot around the globe, to Ukraine, which is the one that I think people feel like they know the best, but I think there's some crucial ingredients that has been overlooked by the media, and it's been overlooked by some of the people that you hear in Congress, because I think members of Congress oftentimes have so much information thrown at them, they can't actually sift through the detail to the extent they should. And I think in this case of Ukraine, you have a clear example of bribery involving Joe Biden. Now, let me step back for a minute and explain what I mean by bribery. We have a federal law that describes exactly what bribery is. And you know what? It's not what the mainstream media tells you it is, and it's not what the congressional Democrats tell you it is. Because what they will tell you repeatedly is, Joe Biden didn't get paid. We don't see Joe Biden getting any money. There's no bribery here. Well, if they bother to actually read the federal code on this law, I'm sure they have, but they're still not going to report it. If a family member receives a financial benefit in exchange for an official act or because of official act, that is bribery every bit as much as if the politician themselves pocketed the money. And honestly, let's think about it. If you are a corrupt politician, unless you are a complete moron, you are not going to get checks. You're not going to cash checks from the people who are paying you bribe money. Even in the Senator Menendez case, the senator from New Jersey who has the gold bars, he's claiming the gold bars are his wife's, that she's the one that had this business. The point is, the politicians rarely get paid. They run it through a third party, and if the third party gets enriched, whether it's a family member, your chief of staff, it does not matter. It is bribery and it is a crime. And that is precisely what happened in this case. So let me just spell it out to you. Some of these things you're obviously going to be familiar with because this is the one that's been most reported, but I think there's a few key ingredients here that have been overlooked. So again, go back to the spring of 2014. Russia storms into Ukraine, invades Ukraine. Joe Biden is appointed the point person for U.S. policy towards Ukraine. All aid dollars, the entire approach that the United States takes towards Ukraine is going to be handled by Joe Biden. 2.5 weeks after that, Burisma, a Ukrainian energy company, says, we need to hire an energy regulatory expert. Let's hire Hunter Biden. No, that's not quite what they said. They did say we need to hire Hunter Biden. And literally within 2.5 weeks of Joe Biden being appointed point person on policy towards Ukraine, Hunter Biden joins the board of Burisma, which is a highly corrupt Ukrainian energy company. In a curious twist, it's actually a pro-Russian Ukrainian company. It was founded by government leaders from the previous pro-Russian regime. So Hunter Biden gets on the payroll. He's getting paid $1 million a year. He is described as providing regulatory advice, which of course he has none. He doesn't know Ukrainian regulations and he doesn't know U.S. energy regulations. But then there's a very interesting email that he gets in October 31st of 2015. And this is what's often overlooked. And I don't know how many times we have talked to people on the Oversight Committee. You have got to refer to this email because it's genuine and it's real. But on October 31st, he gets an email from a gentleman named Vadim Podarsky, who is the vice president of Burisma. And the email basically says, hey, you know, we're paying you $1 million a year, and we're not really happy with the service that we're getting from you. He said, I would like to have a series of deliverables in exchange for the money that we are paying you. And one of those deliverables that he mentions explicitly is you need to get the Ukrainian prosecutors to lay off the head of this company, who's the guy that's paying you $1 million a year. It's that explicit, and this is very important from a legal standpoint because what Burisma is saying is we are giving you $1 million not to look nice, not to look pretty, not to pretend you know anything about energy. We're giving you $1 million for a very specific thing. That's October 31st of 2015. We now know that in December of 2015, about 6 weeks later, Hunter Biden, his business partner, Devin Archer, who testified, who I've talked to, and two executives from Burisma meet in Dubai, and Hunter calls who? He calls his father and says, Dad, you need to get that prosecutor to lay off of Burisma. This is what Devin Archer, his business partner, testified. So think about this again. We're paying you $1 million. We expect a deliverable. Here's the deliverable. Hunter Biden calls his father and says, Dad, you need to get, the Burisma executives are there, you need to get this prosecutor to lay off the head of Burisma who's paying me this money. 2.5 months later, the prosecutor is fired. Now, Joe Biden, you've probably seen the videotape, has bragged about this. And I have to tell you, when this tape first came out in 2019, my initial reaction was, this is impossible. He's not that stupid. He's not that stupid to brag on national television that he leveraged $1 billion in aid. Because remember what he said, I'm not giving you $1 billion until you fire this prosecutor. By the way, the prosecutor who my son called me about and who Burisma said you need to get fired to get your $1 million. That's the chain of events. But alas, he is that stupid because he stood in front of the world and took credit for firing the prosecutor. I would argue, and I would say, and I've been studying corruption, Republicans and Democrats for decades, you are not going to find a more clear-cut example of bribery than that. It's not going to show up in a shoebox. They're not going to meet in a dark alley. Or, you know, Joe Biden's not going to carry one of those big cartoon checks, you know, that says, I get $1 million from Burisma to the bank so everybody can take a picture of it. This is how corruption happens and how bribery happens. And that is, to me, the reason that Joe Biden should be impeached and the reason that the criminal justice system is going to catch up with him. Now, who believes that Hunter Biden is going to serve a day in jail? Nobody. I kind of do, but I get accused of being an optimist all the time, so you can kind of dismiss that. But who believes that Joe Biden is going to be impeached? Nobody. That's interesting because I think he actually might be impeached. I think there's a very real prospect that he could be impeached. By that I mean at the impeachment trial. You know, he's not going to be expelled by the Senate, but I do believe we are going to have a trial. But here is where I start to get optimistic, and I want you guys to help this. We're going to have a robust question and answer session here, and I want to get your opinions on this. But this is where I'm optimistic. When we first broke this story in 2018, we got a little coverage from the Wall Street Journal. We got coverage from Fox News, a bunch of coverage from Fox News. Book got a lot of attention, #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and then it all went away. Now, after the book came out in the middle of 2018, I actually met with a reporter from the New York Times who I know, And he was interested in my book, Secret Empires, because we had an expose in there on Mitch McConnell. So he wanted to know all the details about what we'd found about Mitch McConnell and the family's ties to China, and those are troubling as well. I'm glad to talk about them. But then I said to him, well, what about the Biden stuff? And he said, well, Peter, if Joe Biden runs for president, we're going to be all over that. They weren't. So think about that. That's where this started in 2018. Then in 2020, Hunter Biden, the gift that keeps giving, left his laptop at a repair shop in Delaware, and the world exploded. You had the Hunter Biden laptop, which we have a copy of. You had the New York Post break this story. You had big tech come in and censor it, prevent people from seeing it and hearing about it. And there was a poll done afterwards in early 2021 that said that people that voted for Joe Biden, if they had known the details of the laptop, 12% of them said that they would not have voted, would not have voted for Joe Biden. That would have been enough to switch the vote in the election. But see what's happening here? 2018, it gets exposed, they squelch it. 2020, more evidence comes out, the laptop, it's exposed, but they squelch it. But where are we today? We are today in a situation where Hunter Biden is facing felony charges in 2 different states. I think there's going to be a third one. I think he's going to be charged for illegal foreign lobbying. You see the president of the United States is now facing an impeachment inquiry. And you have, I have to tell you, an oversight committee that is committed and hard-charging and focused on facts and details that I think is handling this investigation very, very well. And the facts are only getting worse for the Bidens. They are not getting better. Now, why does that all make me optimistic? We've been down this kind of road before, right? Where politicians promise us accountability, it never happens. Well, a curious thing has happened over the last 4 or 5 years as this story has evolved. The American people have heard about it, and the common sense of the American people remains that they know that something is wrong. So a couple of months ago, Harvard-Harris poll, this is Harvard University and Harris, which is connected with ABC News, had a survey, asked American voters, do you believe that Joe Biden engaged in criminal activities for the benefit of his family business? 65% of Americans said yes, they believe that he did. New York Times had a poll you may have heard about a couple weeks ago that said Trump is winning in certain swing states. If you look at the crosstabs below the surface on those polls, and the question is, in swing states like Wisconsin and Georgia, do you believe that Joe Biden engaged in illegal activity to benefit the family business? Again, 65 to 68% of the American people said yes. That's enormously important. That's enormously important. We know what they're going to say about whoever the Republican nominee is going to be. If it's Trump, we know what their strategy is. They're already playing it out, and it probably is going to be Trump. But even if it were somebody else, we know basically what their strategy is going to be. They're going to call them an extremist, or they're going to twist their record. They're going to, drill down on the most absurd stories, like remember the story about Mitt Romney cutting some kid's hair in middle school back in 2012. They're going to run those kinds of stories, and they're not going to run these kinds of stories. But here's the thing. I'm going to argue to it. It matters less and less every time more revelations come out and people are exposed to the truth. The point is, the bottleneck of the news media has been broken. And the fact is that there are still enough of American people who take these sorts of things seriously. It's hard to believe that. It's hard to imagine that from time to time. We often get caught up into thinking nobody cares. The fact is that there still is a remnant of people who care about these issues. And they're waking up to it. And I think they're waking up into it in a way that's going to have a dramatic effect going ahead in 2024, which is an election year. So I'm going to close on that note, and I'm going to take any questions from you. And I would like to take questions from you about the Bidens. It could be about other corruption. It could be about Mitch McConnell. It could be about the 2024 election. It could be about the news media. But I'd love to answer any questions on this. And again, thank you so much for coming here, and I really do mean it. I get sort of down with what I do because you see the real dark side of humanity and people in power. But coming here and seeing people that are engaged, they're here on a Saturday night, they're concerned about their country, they care about first principles, and they're engaged. So thank you for coming and encouraging me tonight. I really appreciate it. We're going to have a microphone, so just be patient. Heather's going to get that.
Is this on?
Is it on?
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Absolutely.
If you want to make your ways to the aisle, we'll alternate between. If anybody'd like to ask a question, please do so. And we'll start here with you, Carla. And we'll go back and forth.
You're talking about when Joe Biden was vice president. Didn't the Obamas know that this was going on?
Yes.
And what did they profit also?
So the Obamas, I talked about this in Secret Empires. I think it's one of the most fascinating sections of the book, which is, you know, the even people that don't like Barack Obama kind of always said, well, you know, he's very left-wing, but we don't think he's financially corrupt. He's corrupt in a very different way. And in Secret Empires, I describe this situation involving sort of one of his best friends who, you know, palled around with Barack Obama all the time. Barack Obama gets elected in 2012. This friend sets up a company called Vistria, an investment fund, and gathers some investors. And then Barack Obama does something very interesting. He goes after for-profit colleges and universities. You might remember this. They went aggressively after them, saying, you know, these schools are terrible. We're not going to give them any school loans. And they went specifically after the University of Phoenix. So I don't know if anyone's had experience with them. I have not, but I've heard people that have gone there had a good experience. But the point is, they went to the University of Phoenix and they said, look, we're not going to let there be any GI loans given to the University of Phoenix, no government-backed student loans. We are going to shut you down. I mean, this is a terminal event for the University of Phoenix. Now, something very interesting happens. Vistria and Barack Obama's best friend now go to the University of Phoenix and say, yeah, you guys are really in trouble. We'll buy this company from you for pennies on the dollar. And they got it for like 11 cents on the dollar. Then his now friend Vistria now owns the University of Phoenix. Miraculously, 6 months later, the Pentagon says, we've changed our mind. We'll let GI loans go. We'll let federal student loans go. So Barack Obama absolutely has his corruption. I think they knew, and there's evidence that they knew what the Bidens were doing. And I think Barack Obama's strategy was basically, you know, keep it within the guardrails, so to speak. So you don't embarrass me too much. You know about my stuff. I know about your stuff. But just don't get too carried away. So absolutely Barack Obama knew about it, and Barack Obama, in my mind, is also a figure that is far more corrupt than people realize, again, because the media doesn't want to pursue these stories. I've got a book that's going to be coming out at the end of February. It's not been announced. It's kind of top secret, but there's a Barack Obama story in there that I will share with you. Just don't, you know, spread it around. But, you know, Barack Obama, is president of the United States and is very, very, very soft on China while he's president of the United States. Within months of leaving the White House, he goes to China, where he speaks in front of an assembly of 3,500 Chinese individuals. And you know how he gets paid? If you want to shake his hand and have a picture taken, it's going to cost you $40,000. If you just want to shake his hand, it'll cost you $900. And they lined up, and Barack cashed in. So there's a side of Barack Obama that, unfortunately, our media does not want to expose because it runs contrary to their narrative. Yes.
It's obvious that Biden's a puppet. Who do you think is running the country?
Jill. Based on that crazy Christmas video, that would be really scary. I don't know if you've seen that Christmas video. I think honestly there are a couple things going on. He has a couple of aides that have been with him for a long time. A guy named Steve Ricchetti, for example. I think he is leaning heavily on those guys. Steve Ricchetti, of course, used to be a lobbyist, so you know where that's probably going to go. I also think Barack Obama has a lot of influence in this administration because a lot of the people that are in the Biden White House used to be in the Obama administration. And there have actually been news reports that a lot of people that work in the White House regularly go to Barack Obama's home in Washington, D.C. Because remember, Barack did not go back to Chicago. He set up operations, so to speak, in Washington, D.C. So I think Barack Obama, and he even joked about this once. I think he went on with Stephen Colbert and said his fantasy would be to be the president of the United States and be able to pull the strings but not get the public scrutiny. 60 Minutes? Was it 60 Minutes? It was 60 Minutes. Okay. Yeah, you can find that video. So I think Barack Obama has a lot of influence, but I think his staff also has a lot of power as well.
World Economic Forum or those? I don't know if Barack's smart enough to be doing it, is he?
Well, what I would say is, to your point, I would say the World Economic Forum and the sort of investor class it represents, they absolutely have influence and steer, but they do it indirectly, right? They work through Ricchetti, they work through Barack Obama. They don't have to directly do it themselves because there's so many people that want to get into the club, so to speak, that are in the White House. So it's done indirectly. But yeah, World Economic Forum absolutely has a huge influence, as do Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos. I would commend to you a colleague of mine, Seamus Bruner, has a book that just came out a couple weeks ago called Controligarchs. And it's about the World Economic Forum, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, et cetera. If you're interested in that topic, I would highly recommend it. It's terrifically researched. So, yes.
So Hunter didn't show up to the Oversight Committee last week.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen to him? And do you think this is how they are going to get Joe to step down so then he can possibly pardon Hunter and then put in somebody else like Gavin Newsom? What's your opinion on all that?
It's a great question. I'm going to preface this by saying I am terrible at political predictions, honestly. All right, I'm the guy that thought we were going to have President McCain in 2008. Seriously. President Romney in 2012. President Clinton in 2016. And President Trump again in 2020. I've been wrong on every single president election since 2008. So, take this with a grain of salt. I think that Hunter Biden is in serious legal peril. And it's really going to come up to Merrick Garland, whether Merrick Garland as Attorney General wants to totally destroy his reputation, which is already, severely damaged, because they went after Steve Bannon for the exact same thing. Steve Bannon, of course, claimed executive privilege because he had worked for Trump in the White House. I'm not a lawyer, but that seems like you could make that plausible claim. Hunter Biden can't claim executive privilege. He's the son of the president. He's just defied them. And it's really quite comical, actually, because you remember he went up to Capitol Hill and he boldly said, "I'm here and I'm not going to testify." Funny thing is, he didn't actually go to the U.S. House side of the Capitol. He went to the Senate side. Because if he had gone on the Senate side, the sergeant at arms could have grabbed him and forced him into the room. So there's a lot of sort of political theater that goes along with this. I think what's going to happen is there's going to be enormous pressure brought on Joe Biden to step down for a number of reasons. One, the corruption issue with Hunter. It's not going to get better. It's only going to get worse. The evidence is going to continue to mount. Because with this impeachment inquiry, they're going to get access to even more material, more documents. Because of that, because of his failing cognitive abilities, and because of his terrible poll numbers, they're going to pressure him to step aside. Jill Biden is going to resist. His senior staff is going to resist. They want him to stay in power because that's where their power resides. But I think you're probably going to see at the convention Joe Biden step aside and he is going to pledge his delegates to Gavin Newsom. And that Gavin Newsom is going to be the nominee. That is what I think is going to happen, but you know, who knows? Who knows? What's that? Yeah, yeah. Well, and the interesting thing is I can't go into, I'm not going to go into any detail, but there is quite a strong presence of Gavin Newsom in the book that's coming out in at the end of February. So we've been looking at Gavin for quite a while. So
Peter.
Yes.
Thank you. Very entertaining.
Thank you.
And full of facts. So I wanted to touch base on this 2024 election.
Mm-hmm.
You know, based on the last election, you could almost put anybody up there that was a Democrat. And the way our system was, which I do believe there was a lot of shenanigans involved, how are we going to stop that again from happening? Do you have any insight on what we can do to keep the elections honest?
Great question. I think that, in my humble opinion, and I'm not an expert in voter fraud, the Trump team made a crucial mistake when they went off the races on the voting machine stuff, which they didn't really have evidence for. I mean, there was really strange anomalies. But the real thing that happened was the mail-in ballots because of COVID. And the drop boxes, and there was, I don't know if you guys saw this Rasmussen poll that came out about a week ago. They surveyed a bunch of people who voted in 2020, and then they found the people that said they voted by mail-in ballot. And then they asked them, did you, fill out somebody else's ballot? Did you get mail-in ballots in 2 different states because you moved on the voter rolls, and did you vote in both states? Over 20% people said yes, they did those things. So think about that. Of all the mail-in ballots, 20%, and the number is probably higher. There's probably somebody who said, I'm not, revealing this on a survey. So the point is, to me, the biggest problem, yes, we've got to be worried about the voting machines. We've got to be worried about some of these other issues. But to me, it's the mail-in ballots. Well, they're gonna try to do it again. They're gonna try to. I would predict there's already talk about we may have a new round of COVID that's coming forward. There's this, what do they call it? A white lung or something, and coming out of China, white lung, whatever that is. So they're gonna try it, and it's gonna be up to us. What can we control? Okay, we can't control a state like Pennsylvania. We can't control a Democrat governor who's going to veto a bill that says you can't have mail-in ballots. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that every conceivable person that we know is voting. We need to help them with their mail-in ballots. I mean, again, one of the mistakes I think the Trump campaign made was they kind of wrote off mail-in balloting. They said it's corrupt, it doesn't work, it's a terrible idea, and I think they ended up not getting as many votes as a result of that, legitimate votes. So we need to focus on what we control, which is making sure that people get out and vote, and I think be vigilant. And that also means, by the way, volunteering at a local voting precinct. My brother-in-law does it, and keeps an eagle eye in Northern Virginia as to what's going on. So I think it's a very, very real concern that you could have a Joe Biden with terrible poll numbers win. I'll put that in quotation marks, because of widespread mail-in ballot fraud. I think it's a very real concern. Yes, sir.
To what extent do you think we have the potential for a 4th shadow government through Barack Obama that's substantively based on Muslim, essentially, prejudices? His basically willingness, if you look at the Middle East and you look at what's happened there, and his influence on that.
It's a good question. It's hard to know with Barack Obama personally, but what I would say is that there is a huge growing political force in the United States, and that is activist Muslims or Palestinians. All you have to do is look at the, what's going on the streets on college campuses and American media, and the Democratic Party is conflicted. because they have a long, Jewish constituency. Jews in the United States tend to vote 80% Democratic, 20% for Republicans. But at the same time, you have Muslim voters that also skew the same way. And in a strange way, the Hamas terrorist attacks on October 7th are creating a kind of existential crisis among progressives in the Democratic Party. And it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. My prediction is that they will essentially jettison Israel and the American Jewish community because they are going to look at the numbers and say these are the trends. There are more Muslim voters, Palestinian people sympathetic to Palestinians than there are to Israel. So they're going to jettison it. So I think it's a major problem, and I also think that there are concerns. There have been concerns expressed in the past that may still exist about application of Sharia law in certain communities. I know there have been concerns in Michigan and elsewhere. The strange thing is, if you look at the Sharia law, obviously they're based on the religious principles of Islam as interpreted by these people, but a lot of those restrictions on conduct and behavior actually fit quite well with the hardline progressive views on many college campuses. About segregating men and women for different reasons, but segregating men and women. So I think it's a problem in the sense that it's going to create a crisis among Democrats. I don't think it represents a majority view among people on the Democrat side. I think certainly there will be efforts to try to influence college campuses with money from the Middle East, et cetera. And that's why I think transparency in these cases is so important. So, good question. Yes.
Yes. Have you studied Executive Order 18348 and the continuity of government initiatives along that line, along with the .gov and .mil websites that expose this whole, the day before the sham proceedings of this Biden administration, quote unquote?
I'm familiar with continuity in government, but I'm not with the specifics. Could you elaborate a little what you're referring to?
Trump issued 18348 the day before he left office, and that has to do with the whole continuity of government and military rule initiatives that are going on behind the scenes that we just aren't getting reporting on. And it's fascinating because it's all out there exposed on the .gov and .mil websites, and there are people who have connected the dots very well on that whole effort.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it. I'll have to look into it. I do know that there is a continuity in government provision in the event of a national crisis that calls for a breakdown. Go ahead.
Yeah, and a part of that was the activation of the Million National Guard, and you don't have them crossing state lines without presidential directive.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I'll have to look into it. Thank you.
I think that microphone went out. You can go ahead and ask.
Okay. Yes, please. Be strong and bold.
Thank you, Peter.
Sure.
So my first question is, I appreciate your comments about the grassroots piece of it, because I think that's incredible. I was a PC for 7 years. I think it is really important that grassroots is consistently doing what it's doing. I moved from Hamilton County. I know you don't know these counties, but I moved from Hamilton County north of here, which is highly Republican, to Marion County, which is highly Democratic. It was kind of shocking to me a bit to the piece of how people do not go out to vote. And you have an amazing audience here, people who, we're all in alignment. We all believe the same things. But I moved from county to county, which literally was a 15-minute drive, to a place where the Democrats have a hold on what they believe. How can you suggest that we make a difference to those independent voters and even those Democrats who might be a little bit not aligned completely or starting to question
Right.
the belief? Because I think that's a key element
Right.
of how we make a difference in our local politics, which then feed up one, of course. And how do you get to them? How do you get them to look at things differently? Because I've really been watching, and we've been very involved in the past 2 years in doing this, and it doesn't seem to be nicking the edge of it at all. So
Yeah.
how do we approach it so that we make a difference in those voters who are not sure.
Yeah.
Because we're all sure. We're all aligned here. We get this.
Yeah.
But how do we make a real difference? How do we shift something? How do we make points move on the scale? I think that's an important piece of what we're trying
It's a great question, and you know, I'm going to take a stab at it. This is not my area of expertise. I'm basically a guy who digs through the dirty laundry of politicians and exposes it. But I think you make a vitally important point, which is, you know, it's one thing to talk about this. You know, think about it. You know, Paul Revere said the British are coming. The British are coming. I'm kind of like trying to be like Paul Revere, but if I'm saying the British are coming, and everybody stays in their home, nobody grabs their musket and you know, meets together proverbially to do something about it, we have a problem. And that's what you're talking about. In my experience, there's probably, and I don't know what percentage, there's probably 30% of the American people who are on the other side politically. They're passionate, strong, closed-minded. They don't want to really talk about this stuff, or they're going to spew to you talking points that you can find on TikTok or on Twitter. And you're probably wasting your time. There's the part in the New Testament where, you know, Paul advises, you know, if you run into resistance, just, you know, shake the dust off your sandals and move on. So I would say, you know, getting into discussions or debates or conversations with somebody that's that embedded is very, very difficult. I'm not saying don't be friends with them, but I would say try, you know, to appease yourself from the notion that you're probably going to persuade them, because it's a lot of what's happened with progressivism. It's become a cultural form of identity. It's become almost a religion. So it's hard to talk people out of something that they believe is a matter of article of faith rather than as an article of reason. But I do think, to your point, and you mentioned this, those swing voters in the middle, to me, the biggest gap that exists in information in America are those swing voters who have the perception and the belief. They sort of, you know, listen to mainstream media, or maybe they talk to family members that, for example, Joe Biden's a moderate. And you'll find swing voters, oh, Joe Biden's kind of a moderate, because they don't hear about the crazy things that are going on. They don't get exposed to it. So part of it, what I would say, is share with them, you know, information, you know, hopefully from a good source that has reliable information that's accurate and true. Share with them information and start to break through and let them realize that they're actually not fully aware of what's going on. Now, it's very hard when you start going down that path. People get very defensive. They don't like to think that maybe you know stuff that they don't know, and they're going to get very defensive. But I think that's what you have to do. And I think that those people are absolutely winnable. I think, what's that?
It matters that they hear you.
Yes.
It matters to hear you.
Exactly right.
It matters that they hear you.
Exactly right. 100%.
Without shoving it at them.
Yes.
It matters that they hear you.
Yes. So, and that's, I think, a great point to make to everybody in this room. We all know these people. They're not terribly political. They vote, but they don't really like political conversations. They're kind of moderates. And the easy thing to do is to just talk to them about the lawn, or talk to them about the football game, or talk to them about the kids, and don't get into that political stuff. And again, like you said, don't come on too strong, but you need to engage those people. And you can engage them simply by saying, oh, you know, I read this really crazy thing the other day, and I looked into it, and it was true, and this is what it was. You've got to engage, because if you don't, most people become politically liberal, I would argue, by osmosis. You know, in other words, the predominant culture, what they're getting from Hollywood, what they're getting from universities, increasingly what they're getting from churches, is telling them to view the world in a certain way. And that's not the way that this organization, the principles that this organization stands for. So, yes, I applaud you. Thank you for bringing that up, and you were quite right to encourage us all to do so. Yes.
Hello. So I guess my question is, do you think that there is a federal elected official that is not corrupt? And then, like Republican or Democrat, because I just think we hear this a lot, especially like Massey, maybe I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But we hear this a lot from like House Freedom Caucus and things like that, like, you know, oh, I'm not corrupt, but like they all have skeletons in the closet too that they're hiding at some extent.
No, it's a great question. Look, there are people that we have looked at and investigated, and we haven't found anything. And we do very thorough research scrubs. And so, if you look on the Republican side, like him or not, Ted Cruz. We've investigated Ted Cruz. I have not found anything that would hint of, corruption that we're talking about. On the Democrat side, now please do not boo me on this. Chuck Schumer. We've investigated Chuck Schumer. We have not found anything yet. I mean, maybe something will emerge. So, yeah. But, my point is that there are people on both sides that are not corrupt. That not everything that is happening in Washington, D.C. is a function of corruption, but it is a major problem, and it's a seductive force that gets people who go to Washington with good intentions, and it kind of lures them in. I worked on a book project probably 12 years ago now with Bobby Jindal. If you remember, the governor of Louisiana. Very, very smart guy, very, very sweet guy, funny guy as well. And he served in Congress for 6 years, and then he left and went to governor. And he said, yeah, if you can believe it, Louisiana politics aren't as dirty as the politics in Washington. And I didn't quite obey that. But he said, when you get to Washington, it's very funny because you get there, everybody's telling you how smart you are. Everybody's telling you how good looking you are. Everybody's telling you you can be president. And he said, when you're first there, one of the first things that happens is the Republican Congressional Committee has all the freshmen come in, sit down, and they all get briefings from lobbyists. And he said, when you first experience that, you're like, this is just gross. This is just feels dirty. This just feels gross. It feels like a cesspool. He said, and then you stay there and you keep doing it, and suddenly the cesspool starts to feel like a hot tub. It still smells, it's still dirty, but you're used to it and you've come to expect it. So the problem with corruption is, and this is why I'm a big advocate for term limits, doesn't matter who you are, Republican or Democrat, it sucks you in, it seduces you, and it's one of the reasons that I am a conservative, or what they used to call a classical liberal. I don't like concentrated power. I don't like big government because it corrupts people. It seduces people. It plays to their worst instincts, which is, I deserve this. And I would say that's probably the biggest motivation for a lot of corruption. I'm sure in Joe Biden's mind, I've done so many good things for this country over the decades, and I've sacrificed so much, so it's okay if my family does some of this. That's the problem with corruption. So there are some good people there.
Yeah, I have one follow-up question. Do
Sure.
you think it is our current political system with how much money is piled into elections is sustainable for having a government that's not corrupt?
It's a good question. Money in politics. It comes up, and it's a problem. I have a different take on this than a lot of people do. Most people view money in politics through the prism of that great Jimmy Stewart movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Who's seen that movie? It's very, very old, but Jimmy Stewart goes in there. He's this innocent guy, and all these dark forces on the outside are trying to corrupt Jimmy Stewart. He stands up to the machine. And so most people view it as kind of a bribery thing, right? The good, clean politician, all these corrupt outside forces trying to corrupt them. I kind of honestly think it's more like extortion. I think it has less to do with, it does happen, but it has less to do with outside forces corrupting clean politicians than it has to do with politicians extorting businesses to donate to their campaigns. Because think about it. What politicians have to do to raise money is they have to create a demand for their services. So they have these tricks. Sometimes they call them milker bills or juicer bills. So a milker bill has nothing to do with the dairy industry. A milker bill is designed to milk campaign contributions from people who want the bill to go away. So, let's say that, I'm a senator from the state of Indiana. I've got a campaign election coming up, and I need to raise some money. So I'm going to introduce a bill for a special tax on big tech. I'm going to slap a 10% excise tax on big tech. Well, what's the first thing that's going to happen? All the big tech company lobbyists are going to line up in front of my office. Oh, Senator Schweizer, what are you talking about? You can't do this. This is going to destroy us. Well, guys, I don't know. I'm willing to think about it. We need to talk about this. I've got a fundraiser going on in a couple of weeks. I see you guys aren't signed up. This literally happens. And the thing with a milker bill is once they pay up, I can withdraw the bill. And guess what? I can introduce it again the next time I'm running for re-election. And so this kind of extortive behavior goes on a lot. So I think the problem with money in politics is real, but I don't think it's a question of protecting politicians from these outside, dirty forces in the private sector. I think it's more about limiting the ability of politicians to extort outside entities for campaign contributions. So I think at the federal level, we should do what we do in Florida, where I'm from, in the state legislature. When the legislature is in session, politicians cannot fundraise, period. They can't solicit donations. They can't ask for donations. They can't hold fundraising events. And so what happens? Number one, there's less extortion. Number two, we have really short sessions, right? And those things aren't too bad. So I think we do that in Washington, D.C., and you enforce it. It would limit these ridiculous long sessions where they talk and do nothing. They're keeping the Senate and the House operating sometimes because people got to raise money. And the threat exists when the legislature's in session, not when the legislature's out. So sorry, long answer for that, but thank you. Great question. Yes.
Yes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about have you talk a little bit about the pandemic. Fool the American people the first time, and this pandemic comes back. The American people will not be fooled again. With all these jabs and everything's going on, and by the way, I did not get the jab. I wouldn't do it. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. So I would like to know who you think is behind the pandemic, the characters behind it, because I'm not convinced that it's just China. And I think there's an array of people behind it, and I would like to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I do think that there are people that profited and benefited from the pandemic. I do lay the blame largely at the feet of China on a couple of levels. And again, this is a little bit in my new book. I'm not going to go into great detail, but it's pretty clear that the virus came from China in the form of a lab leak, possible an intentional leak, but I doubt it. Probably a lab leak. But here's the other thing that people don't realize. Remember, we had a massive shortage of like masks and gloves. We had 3,500 doctors died because we didn't have enough masks, and Trump got blamed for it. If you go back and look at the history of it, so China knew in November of 2019 that they had a virus that was breaking out. They knew that that virus could be transmitted from person to person. But they didn't tell the West that. We didn't know that until the end of January. So for 2.5 months, the Chinese knew that if I'm coughing, I can give it to this person. But they didn't tell the rest of the world. What do they do in that 2.5 months? They cornered the market in masks and gloves and supplies. I mean, it was intentionally on their part to maximize the body count on our side. There's just no other way to see it. And there's a series of other things that China did. So I lay the blame at China. I think that President Trump made mistakes in the way that he dealt with China. He trusted them too much. He made some other critical mistakes. And then, of course, there are political bodies that benefited from it. They loved grabbing that power, the lockdowns and shutting down schools. Teachers didn't have to go to the classroom. The teachers' unions loved it. They benefited. And then, of course, you look at the side of Big Pharma and the other entities who profited massively from this arrangement. I mean, think about it. This research gets funded. They get all legal liability removed. And then you have the government mandate in a lot of cases that you have to get this done or you will be fired. I mean, it's an enormous profit vehicle for Big Pharma. So yeah, there's a lot of powerful forces that benefited. I am, like you, optimistic. I still have enough faith in the American people that I think if they try the same script this time, this movie's going to end very differently. And I think in a more positive, freedom-oriented way than it did last time. So.
Okay, one more question.
All right.
Well, I actually have two questions.
Sure,
but
that's fine.
The first one is you were going to talk about Mitch McConnell, but you never really mentioned anything about him and his connections. And then the second question would be, do you think that if Trump is the nominee, he can get elected?
Yes, I do think Trump can get elected. And I think that, again, with the caveat of the issues of the ballots, et cetera, I think that if Donald Trump had a superpower, his superpower would be that he has this amazing ability to bring out the worst in his opponents. He brings out the absolute worst in his opponents. I mean, you go on, we were talking about this earlier, you go on and listen to Joe Scarborough talk about, and you know, I knew Joe Scarborough when he was a Republican congressman from Florida, and he used to have a show on MSNBC that was kind of conservative, but he's on national television saying that if Donald Trump is elected president, he will start shooting people in the streets. And you know, the reporters from the New York Times, they're nodding like, yeah, no, this could really happen. And I just think swing voters in the middle, maybe they don't like Trump, they don't like the way he talks, they don't like his lifestyle, they don't like his arrogance, whatever you want to say. They look at that and say, come on, he's not going to shoot guys in the streets. I think a lot of them are look at it and say, you have President Trump, who they're telling me is a dictator, and then we have President Biden, who has passed executive orders that he knows is unconstitutional. He's used the federal government machinery to try to censor his political opponents. The list goes on and on and on. There's far more things that Joe Biden's done that are dictatorial than Donald Trump ever did in his four years in office. So I think Trump can win. It's going to come down to issues related to ballots, and it's going to come down to Donald Trump, that he stays disciplined and focused on what the voters want, rather than just making this a revenge tour of 2020. I think if too many voters feel like he's just doing this because, pardon the language, he's just pissed off that he lost and he's not really thinking about them, he won't win. But I think the odds are that he probably will. To Mitch McConnell, and I could talk a lot about Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell and his family fortune is tied up completely with the Chinese government. He's married to Elaine Chao, his wife. She was in the George W. Bush administration. She was in the Trump administration. Her father owns a company called Foremost Shipping. And this is a company that is completely and totally dependent on the good graces of China to make money. And it really started happening in 1994. 1994, I won't go through the whole history of it, but in 1994, it's 5 years after Tiananmen Square, nobody in American politics would go to China. Nobody wanted to talk to the Chinese because of the human rights violations that had occurred. And Mitch McConnell goes to China with Elaine Chao and his father-in-law to meet with the Chinese State Shipbuilding Corporation. And the Chinese basically said, hey, this guy's a senator from Kentucky. His wife's a prominent Republican. Tell you what, guys, we'll really help you expand your business. The big, shipping, the big ships that go around the Pacific, we'll build those for you. And we'll finance the construction of those ships to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars. We'll find the crews. We'll actually get the crews. We'll get Chinese nationals to be the crews on your ships. And we'll give you a bunch of contracts with Chinese state-owned companies. We're going to make you rich in the shipping business. And guess what? They did. And Mitch McConnell has received multi-million-dollar gifts from his father-in-law repeatedly. And he has taken a very soft line towards Beijing as a result. And that's why you're not going to see Mitch McConnell really do anything of substance on fentanyl. You're not going to see Mitch McConnell do anything of substance on the rising Chinese military threat. He will talk about it, but he won't actually do something about it. And the Chinese call this big help with a little bad mouth. That's the expression they use. So in other words, they don't mind if Mitch McConnell says, oh, China's doing terrible in human rights violations. They recognize he needs to give the little bad mouth. What they want is the big help, and the big help is what Mitch McConnell's giving them. So that's the shortened version of Mitch McConnell. But I write about it in my book, Secret Empires, and there's going to be new stuff in my forthcoming book. So thank you so much. You have been a great audience. This has been wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. We're so delighted to have you here. And I want to thank everyone and remind you, please stay. Those doors will be opened, or you can open them now. There's dessert, there's a bar, there's beer, there's wine. And the whole point of First Principles Forum is to bring people together for a return to civil discourse. So we hope you'll stay and enjoy the rest of the evening. Also, on your way out, if you don't have a First Principles Forum Christmas ornament, please grab one on your way out and have a Merry Christmas. Thank you.